Hello, my name is Olurotimi Osha. I like talking about American history. Today, I want to briefly discuss the parallels between um, Britain's Seven-Year War, that was between 1756 and 1763, um, which Britain fought against France on behalf of the American colonists, right? To protect the American colonists and to secure the Ohio River Valley, which was a very rich, fertile, and strategic area. I want to draw a parallel with America's perennial, its quagmire and never-ending wars in the Middle East. As America tries to protect one nation or the other in the Middle East, and how, you know, judging from history, the future of America's presence in the Middle East might end up being like what happened to Great Britain uh, in the Americas. So, of course, we're ostensibly in the Middle East, and we have various interests: the Arabian Peninsula, the Arab states, the GCC nations. We're there to protect them militarily against, um, you know, against these terrorist groups or the hegemony of Iran. We're there to ostensibly protect Israel. We can't protect Israel, by the way. Israel can protect itself. It's more than capable with with the Mossad and its innovative advanced technology and weaponry and military, right? So Israel is more than capable in protecting itself, but America expends so much resources, right? Because again, we're not doing it for altruistic reasons, right? It's taxpayer money, and America is, yes, the dominant power today, world global power, but America also has its interests to maintain, and we have to weigh what is it that we're really benefiting from our presence in the Middle East, right? It's a quagmire. We've been engaged in very costly wars that's been costing taxpayers billions and billions and billions of dollars, apart from lives that can never be replaced, right? People, they've lost lives, the invaluable American lives, the lives of our soldiers, the lives of even civilians who go and work there, the blowback of terrorism, when there are people there who believe American presence there is counterproductive, or it's denigrating to their customs or to their independence. It encroaches on their own liberties. We don't really know what's going on. But in any event, I just want to refer back to America's history, right? So, America, we were a bunch of colonies, right? In the 17th century, the British gave us charters, right? Gave, the early colonists, let me not say me, I wasn't there then. I'm saying us because it's the history of America is now my history as well, because I'm an American citizen, right? Even though I wasn't there at the time. But so the British created uh, through its charters, created these colonies for the British, right, on the Atlantic coastal areas, right, on the Atlantic. And eventually there was always conflict there because there were the Native Americans that the colonists contended with, and more importantly, there was the significant power of the French, right? The French had territories as well, had interests there. Uh, Now there was this contested region, right, that was very promising and that was very rich and fertile. And that's the Ohio River Valley, which was very rich agriculturally, and it was very germane, appropriate for settlement, right? It was very strategic, and the access to the Ohio River and the Mississippi River, it was a strategic place to be able to control. There was the fur trade, so Britain comes along and fights this war against the French on behalf of the colonists, right? Britain wins the war. It was a very long war, 7 years war. Britain wins the war, and of course, it's supposed to be a possession of Britain, right? So, what does Britain do? Britain then uh, imposes taxes, the stamp tax, right, to recoup its losses from the war and the cost of putting its soldiers, because British troops were basically there. It made the colonists feel secure, feel protected. So British troops were there in the Americas, right, helping to protect the colonists, just the way we have our military bases in the Middle East. But those bases cost a lot of money. The cost of maintaining those bases in the Middle East, it's atrocious, right? That's why the budget of the Department of Defense, called the Department of War now, is over $1 trillion. And just today, the Secretary of Defense was asking for $200 billion more, right? So it's atrocious. It's very costly. It's taxpayers that bear the burdens, right? Um, so the British decided, because actually, by the way, after the prosecution of that 7 year war in which Britain won, um, Britain's finances, its national debt, almost doubled. It went from about £75 million to £133 million, because on account of this war, the 7 year war, that Britain prosecuted on behalf of the American colonists, right? So Britain tried to transfer this debt, this financial burden, on the colonists. It made sense, and because Britain also still stationed its troops to protect the colonists, it made the colonists feel secure from attacks from whether the indigenous groups, whether Native Americans, who of course were roused that their lands were being taken over, or the French, or if the French still had any um, ideas of coming back. British troops being stationed there, it made the colonists feel, secure, protected. So the British imposed the Stamp Act, right? The Stamp Act was a stamp on all, printed materials, printed materials, printed documents. It was a way to recover, and writing materials and whatnot. It was a way for the British to recoup uh, the uh, the cost, the cost they'd incurred from the prosecution of the 7 year war on behalf of the American colonists. And we all know what happened from there, from 1763, how the colonists started to agitate and wanted to shake off independence. Because, by the way, our founding fathers, who were brilliant, they realized if they could successfully shake off the independent, shake off the yoke, shake off the control of Britain and become independent. Britain had the Atlantic separating them. Britain would not be able to control uh, the resources, the lands to the west, right, which were rich and promising. And of course, eventually in 1776, America declared its independence and went to war with Great Britain, and we asserted our independence. And since then, we've become even a stronger power um, than Great Britain. Now, what am I trying to say? I don't see what it is that America really benefits from being in the Middle East, right? We're there. Yes, there was a time that we needed the oil of Saudi Arabia. Those are what our businesses, our business entrepreneurs, right? What they needed, right? Because for the most part, um, the American system, the American system is not a socialist or a publicly centered, publicly driven uh, 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 polity, right? Most of our economy is driven by the private sector, so they can do business anywhere they want to, right? So, America withdrawing its bases from the Middle East, right, does not stop uh, ExxonMobil or whoever does business, in the Middle East from continuing to do business over there. You know, things have changed. You know, this is no longer the era of, law of the jungle, or you know, when there could be savages who could attack your people. And um, this is not to cast aspersions on anyone. This is just a metaphor, because um, no one's going to be attacking Americans. You know, we now have a rules-based order, right? The It's America that just recently broke the rules-based order, but we have a rules-based order which, for the most part, nations, want to respect, and so we should focus on respecting the rules-based order. Um, Imagine a scenario where America keeps engaging in all these costly wars in the Middle East, right? Now we're in a quagmire with Iran, right? We didn't need to go, according to uh, the recent the the director of the U.S. National Counterterrorism Center, who just recently resigned, Joe Kent. We didn't have any reason to go to war in the Middle East, to war with Iran, because Iran didn't pose an imminent threat to us. We're here in America, far away across the ocean, right? How Iran doesn't pose any threat to us, right? So if he claims we went to war because of Israel, right? Now imagine a situation where we're providing all these military bases and protection for Saudi Arabia, for the GCC countries, and then we keep going to Israel's wars. And one day these nations in the Middle East decide to kick America out or go to war with America, right? There are no permanent allies, there are no permanent enemies in war. Britain and the Americans were brothers. In fact, in the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson makes that allusion. Calls them, calls the British, their, our brothers, right? But they went to war with each other. Now they are the staunchest of our allies today, right? Even after the wars, there was another war of 1812, vicious wars in which they killed each other. There are no permanent enemies and no permanent allies. Today, Israel is still a young nation. 1948. It was its staunchest supporter used to be Great Britain, but all of a sudden, I don't know how America became its staunchest supporter. Right? America is going to wars on its behalf. What would happen when Israel eventually asserts its hegemony over the Middle East with the destruction of Iran, with its subjugation of Iran, if it's successful in doing that? If America is supposed to help accomplish that, what will happen when um, it's cost Americans so much? It's costing us a lot. We've not been in the war with engaged in the war with Iran for a month. We're already asking to be replenished. The Department of Defense or Department of War is already asking to be replenished to get $200 billion again, right? This is very costly. Why isn't America asking the GCC nations or Israel for money to be able to continue prosecuting the war? After all, if our military is to be engaged as like a military, like a mercenary force, mercenaries are paid, by the turf that's engaging them, that's using them to fight their wars, right? The American taxpayers cannot keep writing checks, you know, to to engage our military, our bases in such a far-flung region that the average American doesn't see its significance to us. We don't even really need the Middle East because, again, America is blessed. We are so rich in resources, in natural resources. And then we have Canada. We have these other regions in the Western Hemisphere. So I'm assuming Donald Trump made the aggressive move, seizing commandeering Venezuela because he wants to deepen and consolidate our interests, our national interests, and draw us closer to the Western Hemisphere, which is very rich as well. So maybe that's what we need to focus on, right? We've been, the Middle East is a powder keg that's just been draining America. It's been draining America. And consider history, right? The war, the 7 Year War in the 18th century, right? From 1756 to 1763, in which America's calling the mother country, Britain, to come and fight its wars against France, literally almost bankrupted England. It almost bankrupted England, doubled England's national debt from 73 million pounds to uh, uh, 155 million pounds. Sorry, 133 million pounds, right? It was a very expensive prosecution of the war on behalf of American colonists. And what did American colonists do in the end? Stab Britain in the back, right? American colonists basically abandoned, eventually, Britain was weak from prosecuting this long war, engaging in a long war against France to protect America. And eventually, America just, literally stabbed Britain in the back by, uh, asserting its independence, fighting, engaging Britain in another long struggle for independence, right? And Britain just had to give it up. So we're only useful in the Middle East until these Middle Eastern nations, right, become rich and resourceful enough to be able to tell America that, well, America's presence in the Middle East has become a burden, has become a problem, and they want to shake things off. Meanwhile, the American taxpayer would have written so much, would have been footing the cost, would have burned so much of the burden of the debts, the costs of America's presence in the Middle East, and its prosecution of long, forever wars in the Middle East, right? With nothing, no benefit for the American people, right? So, I think it's really time for America to just, exit the Middle East, and this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for America to exit the Middle East because something America has a major rival in the world now, and that's China. And China's watching everything America's doing. And America's wasting resources right now, being there, fighting this war with Iran. But, we can get out immediately, get out and retrace our steps and then use the opportunity to rapidly rebuild internally, focus on, the American government, the American people, the American um, we have virtually a continent. The American, the turf, the American homeland. Focus on that. I'm sure many people who voted for President Trump on the America First policy. I'm sure the American First thing that they voted for him for. I'm sure they weren't thinking of America First is America's presence in fighting a foreign war in the Middle East on behalf of other nations, right? In the Middle East, have American soldiers die on behalf of, other nations, right? Because Iran doesn't pose a threat to the United States. Iran is very sophisticated politically, right? Uh, Iran is only going to it's going to counteract any measures that it assumes, it perceives America is taking against it. If America stays away from Iran, Iran's not going to do anything to America, right? America doesn't have to fear any threats from America. All those terrorist movements that arise, they're from actions, they're reactions from what America has been doing in the Middle East, really. Forget the false narratives of the media. There are no jihadists who just want to go and engage in world uh, dominate the world. No, that's false, right? That's a false narrative, right? I've studied the history of Islam. I did history of the Middle East. They're reacting to America's current presence in the Middle East, what America's been doing in the Middle East, right? Again, Newtonian physics, right? It's his third law. If you engage in an action, expect an equal reaction, equal reaction, a counterattack. It's self-defense. That's what they've been doing. I mean, we haven't studied or inquired, and the media has misrepresented the actions, the activities of America in the Middle East. There's no religion in it. Islam is not. Their current orientation is not to go and create, to be jihadists and create world, to force everybody else to be Muslims. That is not true. That's not true, right? In Islam, they say if you're attacked, right, they're obligated to defend themselves. They have a responsibility for self-defense. So anything that you're saying, they're probably reacting. Don't forget, there was a time Christians. It's just like likening modern day Christians to the medieval Christians or the Dark Ages Christians who were engaged in crusades, the Knight Templars. Yes, there was a time in Europe that Christians, Christian monks, priests, they were soldiers. They fought a war against evil, right? They would engage in what they called malicide, right? Fighting wars against evil. The Pope used to had armies that he would order to go and fight wars, and they would fight all these wars in Jerusalem. I talked about a movie that I'd seen before in an earlier video, and I called it The Kingdom, in which Orlando Bloom was in. And there was the guy, the Egyptian vizier, who had conquered Jerusalem, and his name was Salahaddin, also called Saladin, right? And the name of the movie is Kingdom of Heaven. There's another movie again that I talked about, and I forgot it. The movie was about the when the Mossad kidnapped. This is some kind of sidebar, but I wanted to be able to correct myself. When the Mossad kidnapped Adolf Eichmann from Argentina, the name of the movie was Operation Finale. And another movie that an earlier rendition, an earlier casting of that of the same story was The House on Garibaldi Street, right? So I just wanted to put that out there. But in any event, yeah. So the war, the 7 Year War, is a cautionary, um, some kind of. It's a lesson for us to be able to remember and to have in our sights, right, top of mind, that what America keeps doing in the Middle East, right? If we're engaging, if our presence is there, protecting, being the minder for other nations, right? Um, Meanwhile, the American taxpayers are the ones footing the bill. It's costing us a lot. It's affect our current our current national debt is over $38 trillion, and it's exploding. Right? We're not investing in ourselves. We can just take a look at what happened to Great Britain. Great Britain was prosecuting wars on behalf of its American subjects, the colonists, in the 7 Year War. And they had this rich, fertile land. And when Great Britain tried to recoup the money through taxes, it made sense. It wasn't unjust. America used the fig leaf of, well, no taxation without representation, right? Maybe Great Britain should have asked Americans, right, to have paid the taxes first of all before they went to war on their behalf against France to secure the Ohio River Valley, right? Because after Britain won the war against France and kicked them out, America then seized the Ohio River Valley for themselves by asserting their independence and fighting the War of Independence. So let's bear that in mind. In any event, my name is Olurotimi Osha, and I will keep you posted. Thank you.